What if the most dangerous thing in your family wasn't yelling or fighting, but silence? My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 26 years old, and my story begins at a Thanksgiving dinner where my own father acted as if I didn't exist. Surrounded by relatives and laughter, he passed the turkey to everyone except me, his daughter, as though I were invisible. That single, devastating moment cracked open a secret I'd been running from my whole life. White right pointing backhand index before I share what happened next. Tell me where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Thanksgiving in my family had always been complicated. From the outside, it probably looked normal, a crowded dining room, plates stacked with food, the faint sound of a football game playing in the background. But underneath the clatter of silverware and the small talk, there was always tension. It wasn't the kind of tension that exploded into arguments. No, it was worse. It was quiet, heavy, like a storm cloud that refused to break. That year, I almost didn't go. I had spent the morning pacing my apartment, telling myself I didn't owe anyone my presence, least of all my father. But guilt has a way of pulling you back. My cousins expected me, and my aunt had even called the night before to remind me to be there early, sweetheart. So I showed up, casserole dish in hand, trying to convince myself I could just blend in and keep my head down. When I walked through the door, the smell of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie filled the house, tugging at old memories I wished I could forget. My aunt hurried over to hug me, cousins waved, and for a brief moment I felt almost welcome. Almost. Because then I saw my father at the far end of the room. He was carving meat with practiced precision, laughing at something my uncle said. His eyes flicked up and landed on me, and then, just as quickly, slid past me like I wasn't there. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile as I slipped off my coat. It wasn't the first time he'd ignored me. Growing up, silence had been his sharpest tool. A slammed door was temporary. Raised voices eventually cooled. But silence lasted. It stretched for days, sometimes weeks. A child will do anything to earn back attention, and I had spent too many years chasing scraps of acknowledgement from him. I told myself I wouldn't let it bother me. I set my casserole down, joined my cousins in the kitchen, and pretended everything was fine. But the longer I stayed, the harder it was to ignore the pattern. At the dinner table, he made a point of pouring drinks for everyone, cranberry juice for the kids, wine for the adults, but his hand skipped my glass. I thought maybe I imagined it. Maybe he just forgot. But then came the food. "Pass the turkey down," he said cheerfully, sliding the platter toward my cousin Rachel, who sat right next to me. She scooped some onto her plate, then turned to hand it to me. But my father's voice cut in. "Actually, give it to Daniel first." His eyes never once looked in my direction. Daniel, my younger brother, grinned sheepishly, taking his portion before sliding the plate further down, bypassing me completely. My chest tightened. No one else seemed to notice, or maybe they chose not to. Conversations about football and holiday sales filled the air, while I sat there staring at my empty plate. I forced a laugh when my cousin asked about my job, though my stomach was in knots. Every clink of a fork, every burst of laughter around the table made me feel smaller. It wasn't the missing food. It was the message. I wasn't worth acknowledging. Not his daughter. Not part of the family. Halfway through the meal, I excused myself, claiming I needed the restroom. Really, I just needed air. I locked the door and leaned against the sink, my reflection staring back at me from the mirror. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes glossy. I hated how easily he could still make me feel like a child begging for attention. I was 26 years old. I paid my own bills, built my own life. Yet sitting at that table, I was right back to being the gal left out of the conversation, punished without words. When I returned, nothing had changed. My father was in the middle of telling a story about his co-worker's fishing trip, laughing like the world was perfectly fine. He never once glanced at me. My fork scraped against my plate, the sound sharp enough to make a few heads turn. But not his. He didn't flinch. My aunt gave me a sympathetic look across the table. She knew. She always knew. But she never interfered, never challenged him. Instead, she tried to fill the silence with gentle conversation, asking about my apartment, my favorite recipes. I answered politely, but the damage was done. I wasn't angry at her, or at my cousins. I was angry at the game my father was playing, a game he'd been winning for years. Then came the moment that broke me. Dessert was served, pumpkin pie, whipped cream piled high. My father took a knife, carefully slicing pieces for everyone. One for Daniel, one for Rachel, one for my aunt. He slid each plate across the table with a smile. But when it came to me, his hand simply skipped over. The pie sat there, untouched, as though my place at the table didn't exist. That was it. That was the moment the dam cracked. My chest ached, my throat burned, but I kept my face still. Inside, though, I made a silent promise. This dinner woo. The scrape of forks against plates was the only sound holding the room together. After my father's sharp words at the Thanksgiving table, nobody dared to speak freely. It felt like we were all sitting on a stage, trapped under a spotlight, pretending this was a normal holiday dinner when, in reality, every word and gesture was carefully rehearsed. My mother, always the director of these silent productions, forced a brittle smile as she reached for the green bean casserole. "Delicious, as always," she said, though her eyes never met mine. Her voice had the tone of someone reading lines from a script, her words polished, hollow, and safe. I could feel the performance tightening around us, like invisible strings pulling us into place. My younger brother, Adam, shifted nervously in his chair, fiddling with his napkin. He was 17 and still too young to fully recognize the weight of these moments, but I saw the way his eyes darted to Dad before he spoke, as if waiting for permission. "So, school's fine," Adam muttered when Mom asked him about his classes. His voice cracked halfway through, and Dad gave a slow nod, as though granting him approval for saying the right answer. Meanwhile, I sat there, frozen, torn between playing my part or tearing down the set altogether. The silence I'd been handed earlier, Dad's refusal to acknowledge my question, his deliberate erasure of my voice, burned inside me. My hands trembled under the table as I clenched my fists in my lap. Grandma, who rarely attended these dinners anymore due to her health, sat at the end of the table. She seemed detached from the theatrics, humming softly as she spooned mashed potatoes onto her plate. I envied her distance. She didn't bow to the silent rules anymore, didn't chase for scraps of approval the way we did. The charade pressed on. Dad cleared his throat. "We should be thankful tonight," he declared, his voice steady and commanding. "Thankful for family, for health, for the roof over our heads." His words sounded noble, even righteous, but they carried the sting of hypocrisy. How could he preach about gratitude while freezing his own daughter out of existence? Mom's face lit up as if to confirm his sermon. "Yes," she echoed quickly, "we're truly blessed." Her voice quivered just slightly, betraying the fear of slipping out of tune. I bit the inside of my cheek. They weren't blessing anything. They were covering wounds with cheap paint. I wondered if anyone else noticed, or if I was the only one choking on the absurdity of it all. When I reached for the basket of rolls, Dad's hand brushed mine. He didn't look at me, didn't flinch, didn't even acknowledge the contact. It was worse than anger. His silence carved me out of the family picture, a ghost at my own table. I pulled my hand back sharply, knocking over my water glass. It tipped onto the tablecloth, spreading a wide, dark stain. Everyone froze. Mom gasped. "Rachel!" she snapped, her voice sharp, then quickly softened. It's fine. Accidents happen." She grabbed napkins, blotting furiously, as though the spill were a mortal sin that had to be erased before Dad passed judgment. Dad, of course, said nothing. His jaw tightened, his gaze fixed firmly on the turkey in front of him. The silence was louder than any shout. Adam tried to lighten the mood. "Hey, at least it wasn't the gravy," he joked weakly. But his attempt fell flat, swallowed by the tension that clung to the room. The dinner dragged on, every bite mechanical. I watched as Mom laughed too loudly at one of Dad's rare comments, as Adam mirrored Dad's posture unconsciously, as Grandma stared off into the distance like she'd seen this play too many times before. It hit me then. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a performance. We were all cast in roles. Dad, the stoic lead; Mom, the dutiful supporting actress; Adam, the eager understudy. And me? I was the mistake on stage, the character whose lines had been cut but whose presence still haunted the scene. When dessert arrived, the act became even clearer. Mom brought out pumpkin pie, carefully slicing pieces as though her life depended on it. She placed Dad's plate before him first, her eyes silently asking for approval. He gave a curt nod, and she exhaled like a prisoner granted mercy. When she placed my plate in front of me, she didn't look at me. Not once. It was as though she feared that even eye contact might break the fragile illusion they'd built. I pushed the pie away. "I'm not hungry," I said flatly. The room stilled. Adam glanced at me, then at Dad, panic flickering across his face. Mom's hand trembled as she set down the knife. Dad leaned back, folded his arms, and said nothing. His silence was a verdict. I could feel it sink into my chest like a stone. The performance faltered for a moment, the carefully constructed script slipping. Mom forced a chuckle, trying to cover the crack. "Well, more for us then," she said, though her smile looked painful, her teeth clenched too tightly. But the damage was already done. For the first time all night, I felt a strange sense of power. By refusing to play my role, I had disrupted their stage. Their silence could erase my words, but it couldn't erase my absence. As the plates clinked and forks scraped once again, I sat back and let the scene play out. I realized then that I didn't need their approval to exist. Their silence might have been their weapon, but it was also their weakness, because silence only works when you're desperate to be heard. That night, I walked away from the table with a heavy heart, but also with the first flicker of defiance. I had seen the cracks in the performance, and once you see the stage lights for what they are, it's impossible to go back to believing the show. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. I left the dining room without saying goodnight, my footsteps echoing down the hallway. The air outside the performance was cooler, freer, but it carried an unease that clung to me like static. I went upstairs, closing my bedroom door quietly behind me, and leaned against it, trying to steady the rush of emotions. My chest felt tight, but beneath the ache, that flicker of defiance still burned. For once, I hadn't played my part. For once, I'd broken the script. But the silence in that house had a way of seeping under doors, curling into every shadow, reminding me that defiance came with consequences. I could almost hear my father's unspoken disapproval pressing against the walls. I sat on my bed, staring at the blank ceiling. The night outside was restless, a cold wind rattling the windows. I wanted to believe I was strong enough to ignore them, to stop caring about their judgment. Yet the truth was, I still craved answers. Silence could erase my words, but it couldn't erase the questions gnawing at me. And that night, curiosity outweighed fear. When the house finally settled into its usual midnight hush, I slipped out of my room. The floorboards creaked softly under my bare feet as I moved down the hallway. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, only that the weight of their performance, of all those stage smiles and empty blessings, demanded something real. I passed the living room where the dying glow of the fireplace flickered faintly. Mom's purse sat on the coffee table, half open, her keys glinting in the light. But it wasn't her purse that caught me, it was the file folder tucked beneath it, edges sticking out just enough to be seen. A strange instinct pulled me toward it. I hesitated, glancing toward the stairs, half expecting Dad's voice to thunder down, demanding to know what I was doing. But the house remained silent. Carefully, I slid the folder free. It was heavier than I expected, thick with papers. The front was marked with my father's handwriting. Private. Do not touch. My pulse quickened. I sat on the couch, opening it with trembling hands. Inside were bank statements, property records, an envelope sealed but never mailed. At first, nothing made sense. But then I found it, A birth certificate. My birth certificate. Except, it wasn't. The name was mine, the date matched, but under father, the line was blank. My mother's name was there, clear and sharp, but the space beside it had been deliberately left empty. My throat went dry. I flipped through the pages faster, heart racing. Beneath it was a faded letter, folded and creased as though it had been hidden for years. The paper smelled faintly of old ink and dust. With shaking fingers, I unfolded it. The words blurred for a moment before snapping into focus. Linda, you don't have to keep this secret. She deserves to know the truth when she's old enough. Pretending won't protect her forever. It wasn't signed. I read it over and over, my mind struggling to piece together what it meant. My father, the man who had spent years controlling every word at that table, the man whose silence cut deeper than anger, might not even be my father at all. The room swayed around me. I pressed the letter against my chest, listening to the rush of blood in my ears. A dozen memories slammed into me at once. The way he looked through me instead of at me, the deliberate distance, the coldness that seemed to deepen as I grew older. Suddenly, it all made sense. I wasn't invisible because I had disappointed him. I was invisible because I was never his to begin with. Footsteps creaked on the stairs. I froze. Mom's voice called softly, Rachel. I shoved the letter back into the folder, my hands fumbling. By the time she appeared at the bottom of the stairs in her robe, I was clutching the file tightly to my chest. Her eyes widened. For the first time all evening, the mask slipped. "What are you doing with that?" she asked, her voice sharp, almost panicked. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "You tell me. What is this?" I held up the folder. Her face paled. She crossed the room quickly, her hand outstretched. "That's private." I stepped back. "Private? It's my name on these papers. My life. You don't get to hide this from me." "Rachel," her voice broke. She glanced toward the stairs, as though terrified Dad would appear. "Please, just put it back. We'll talk later." "No," I said, louder this time. "We'll talk now." Her eyes glistened, her lips trembling. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He's not your father." The words cracked through the room, sharp and final. I stood frozen, my chest tightening as though the walls were closing in. I had suspected, but hearing it spoken aloud split something open inside me. I whispered, "Then who is?" She lifted her head, eyes red. "Someone I knew before your father and I were married. It was complicated. I thought." Her voice broke again, and she pressed her hands to her mouth, trying to compose herself. "You thought what?" I demanded. My voice shook, but I couldn't stop. That I'd never find out? That this wouldn't matter? Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought if we raised you together, you'd never feel different." Different. The word stung. I already felt different, different enough to be silenced at every meal, different enough to be treated like a shadow. And now I knew why. The sound of footsteps upstairs made both of us freeze. Dad's heavy tread crossed the hall, paused at the top of the stairs, then retreated back into the bedroom. Mom's voice dropped to a desperate whisper. "He doesn't know that I know you've seen this. Please, Rachel, don't tell him tonight. Please." I clutched the folder tighter, anger and hate swelling in my chest. I didn't answer. I just turned and climbed the stairs, leaving her trembling in the living room. In my room, I closed the door quietly and pressed my back against it. My whole world felt shattered, rearranged by a single truth I hadn't asked for. The flicker of defiance I had carried from the table burned brighter now, fed by something deeper than anger. For the first time, I understood why his silence cut so sharply, because it wasn't silence at all. It was rejection. And that night, as the wind howled outside my window, I realized the performance was over. The truth had stepped onto the stage, and nothing would ever look the same again. I stood pressed against the door of my room, the folder still clutched in my hands. The walls seemed smaller, the air heavier, as if my secret had already leaked into the plaster, whispering through the house. My body trembled, not from fear alone, but from the weight of a truth I hadn't been built to carry. I set the folder on my desk and stared at it. My reflection in the darkened window looked like a stranger, pale, eyes rimmed red, hair tangled from running my fingers through it. I whispered to the glass, as if testing the words on my own tongue. "He's not my father." The sentence left my lips like a shard of glass, cutting on its way out. The sound of movement downstairs broke the silence. Low voices, Mom's, sharp and pleading, Dad's, low and heavy. I strained to hear, but the walls muffled their words. Still, the tone carried enough. She was panicked. He was suspicious. A cold dread sank into me. He knew something was off. I paced the room, my heart beating too fast. Part of me wanted to run, to grab the folder and leave the house forever. But the larger part, the part that had endured years of silence, dismissal, and staged family performances, was tired of running, tired of swallowing questions until they soured into shame. The breaking point wasn't coming. It was already here. The floor creaked in the hall. A knock came, firm and unyielding. "Rachel," Dad's voice called. Not a question, an order. I froze. For a moment, I thought about staying silent, pretending I was asleep. But something inside me snapped. I yanked the door open. He stood there in his robe, tall and broad-shouldered, his eyes shadowed by the dim light. "Where's your mother?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "Downstairs." His jaw tightened. "She says you found something." His eyes flicked past me into the room, scanning the shadows. I crossed my arms, though it barely covered the trembling in my hands. "I didn't find it. It was left out. Don't act like I was snooping." His stare hardened. "Show me." The demand sliced through me. For years I had obeyed his every unspoken rule, bent myself to avoid his disappointment. But now the truth was binding through me, demanding to be spoken. "No," I said, my voice trembling but firm. His nostrils flared. "Rachel, I won't ask again." I stepped back, close enough to the desk that my hand brushed the edge of the folder. The pulse in my throat hammered so hard I thought he could hear it. "Why isn't your name on my birth certificate?" I asked suddenly, the words ripping out before I could stop them. For the first time in my life, I saw him falter. Just slightly. His eyes narrowed, then darted to the side, then back to me. "You shouldn't have seen that," he said quietly. The silence that followed was louder than any argument. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, the wind clawing at the window outside. My hands curled into fists. "So it's true," I whispered. "You're not my father." His jaw locked, but he didn't answer. That was all the confirmation I needed. A scream built in my chest, but it came out as a broken cry. "All these years, you made me feel like I was never good enough. Like I was the problem. But it wasn't me, was it? It was you. You couldn't even look at me because I wasn't yours." His voice rose then, deep and sharp. "Enough." I flinched, but didn't stop. "No, not this time. You don't get to silence me anymore. You don't get to decide what I know, or how I live, or who I am." My voice cracked, but I kept going, tears blurring my vision. "You lied to me my entire life." He stepped closer, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. "Everything we did was to give you a family, a roof, a name. You think this world is kind, Rachel. You think truth makes life easier. No, it breaks people." "Then maybe I need to be broken," I spat back. His face shifted, something raw flickering behind the hardness. For the first time, he looked less like a father and more like a man cornered by his own choices. Mom appeared in the doorway, breathless, her eyes darting between us. "Stop, please, both of you." But neither of us moved. I pressed my hand against the desk, fingers tightening on the folder. You don't get to rewrite my life. Not anymore. I decide what this truth means. Dad's voice dropped lower, dangerous in its calmness. If you walk down this path, there's no turning back. Do you understand that? I met his eyes, my whole body shaking but my voice steady. Good. The silence cracked like thunder. Mom sobbed softly in the doorway, but I couldn't look at her. My world had narrowed to him, to the man who had built a cage out of secrets and expected me to live quietly inside it. I tore the folder off the desk and held it against me. You can't control me anymore. Something in his expression shattered. Anger, fear, maybe even regret. But before he could speak, I pushed past him. My shoulder brushed his arm, and the contact sent a chill down my spine. I stormed down the hall, down the stairs, my bare feet pounding against the wood. Mom's voice trailed behind me, pleading, but I didn't stop. The walls that had once kept me silent now seemed to echo with every step, amplifying the sound of rebellion. In the living room, the fire had nearly burned out, embers glowing faintly in the dark. I dropped the folder onto the table with a thud that sent ashes drifting into the air. This. I pointed to it, breathless, trembling. This is the truth, and I won't pretend it doesn't exist. Mom covered her mouth, eyes wet with tears. Dad stood at the bottom of the stairs, a towering shadow, silent and unmoving. For a moment, no one breathed. And then, as if the house itself couldn't contain the weight of it, the silence cracked. Mom sobbed harder. Dad's fists clenched at his sides. And me? I felt hollow and alive all at once. Because the breaking point wasn't just mine. It was ours. The family performance had collapsed. And in its place was something raw, jagged, and real, whether we wanted it or not. The folder still sat on the coffee table, edges frayed where my grip had bent them. The embers in the fireplace pulsed faintly, a dying glow, and in the silence that followed, I felt every breath in the room like it was scraping against glass. Mom lowered herself into a chair, her sobs muffled behind trembling hands. Dad stood at the base of the stairs, his shadow stretching across the floorboards, unmoving, unreadable. And me. I was caught between them, my heart still pounding from the storm that had broken upstairs. For the first time, I realized how fragile this house was. Not the walls or the roof, but the illusion inside it. One lie had been pulled loose, and the entire structure threatened to collapse. I sank onto the edge of the couch, my body trembling, my voice hoarse. This ends here. Dad's head turned sharply, his eyes dark and steady. What does that mean? I forced myself to look at him. It means I'm not living like this anymore. The silence, the control, the pretending, it stops with me. I won't carry your secrets any longer. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The silence felt like an answer. Mom finally lifted her head, her face streaked with tears. Rachel, please, don't do this. We can still keep this together. No one has to know. Do you hear yourself? I cut in, my voice cracking. That's exactly what got us here. You kept everything hidden. And for what? So we could play happy family while I grew up believing I was broken. I can't be part of that anymore. The words shook me even as I said them. For years, I had molded myself to fit their fragile narrative, burying questions and swallowing pain. Saying it out loud felt like ripping a chain off my chest. Dad stepped forward, his shadow shrinking as he moved closer to the dim glow of the fire. You think you're the first to want out. You think you're stronger than the rest of us. Life doesn't bend because you yell at it, Rachel. It crushes people who walk away. His words cut deep, but not in the way he intended. They revealed him. The man who had always seemed untouchable suddenly sounded tired, as if he too had been crushed once and had chosen control over freedom. I swallowed hard, my voice low. Then maybe that's the cycle I need to break. For the first time, Mom looked at him, really looked at him, not as husband, not as father, but as a man with his own fractures. Her lips trembled. She's right. We've been hiding so long we don't know what truth even feels like anymore. His head snapped toward her, a flicker of betrayal in his eyes. But her words had already landed. The air thickened with unspoken history, all the choices they had made long before I was old enough to understand. And for once, I didn't feel like the child in the room. I felt like the only one willing to stop suffocating. I stood, my legs unsteady, but my voice steady. I don't want to hate you, either of you, but if I keep living this way, I will. And I refuse to spend the rest of my life carrying the same bitterness you've carried. The silence broke into sharp fragments. Dad's fist loosened at his side. Mom's sobs softened into shallow breaths. The house no longer felt like a cage. It felt like the aftermath of an earthquake. Cracks everywhere, but space to finally breathe. I turned toward the front door. My bare feet pressed against the cold floor, each step deliberate. Mom's voice rose, thin and fragile. "Rachel, where are you going?" I paused with my hand on the knob. The cool metal grounded me, steadying the storm inside. To start over. Her breath caught. "Alone." I swallowed. "If that's what it takes." I opened the door, and the night air rushed in, sharp and clean, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. The world outside was wide, uncertain, but real. Not a performance. Behind me, Dad's voice finally cracked, raw and unguarded. "Rachel." I froze. His tone was different, stripped of command, stripped of certainty. Just my name, fragile on his tongue. I didn't turn around. My eyes stung, but I held my ground. "I'm not running from you. I'm running from becoming you." The words hung heavy, and in the silence that followed, I stepped outside. The night wrapped around me, cool and vast. For the first time in years, I wasn't suffocating under their weight. My chest hurt, my legs trembled, but beneath it all was something new, an ember that refused to go out. Freedom. I walked down the porch steps, the gravel crunching under my feet. And though I had no clear destination, I knew exactly what I was leaving behind, the cycle of silence, shame, and control that had ruled this house for too long. And I wasn't going back.